Most people think power comes from speaking up, proving a point, or winning an argument. But the truth is, some of your greatest strength is revealed in the moments you don't react. When you walk away silently, not out of fear, but out of self respect, you communicate something stronger than words ever could. You show that you're in control of your emotions, your energy, and your peace. And that quiet confidence, that's what people feel the most. Walking away silently is one of the cleanest boundaries you will ever set because it shifts the entire conversation from defending yourself to protecting yourself. Most people don't realize how much energy they waste trying to explain their intentions, justify their actions, or argue for their worth. When you walk away without raising your voice, without giving a speech, without proving anything, you show that your peace isn't up for debate. You're no longer trying to win the other person over, you're choosing to win yourself back. The power in this moment comes from the fact that silence is not submission. Silence is strategy. The other person might expect a reaction, a comeback, or a confrontation, but when you don't give them that, when you move away from the situation with clarity instead of chaos, they're left alone with their own behavior. And that's where real accountability begins, not in the argument you have with them, but in the mirror they face once you're gone. Walking away silently shows that you no longer feel the need to convince someone to treat you well. That's a major shift because most conflict is rooted in the desire to be understood. People explain themselves because they want the other person to see their side. But understanding doesn't come from shouting, respect doesn't come from repetition, and peace doesn't come from negotiation. When you stop trying to rewrite someone's perspective, you reclaim the energy you were giving away for free. One of the strongest things you can signal in a tense moment is emotional control. You're not shutting down. You're not running away. You're simply choosing not to feed a fire that doesn't deserve your oxygen. And people feel that. They feel when you're not reactive, when you're not emotionally hooked, when you're not playing the same game. Your silence becomes a quiet reminder that you're not available for conversations that dishonor you. You don't need to match their tone to maintain your dignity. And the truth is, most arguments aren't about resolution. They're about winning. They're about being right. They're about pulling you into a place where you lose your calm so the other person can justify their behavior. But when you walk away without engaging, you take away the fuel, you take away the reward, you take away the emotional payoff they were hoping to get. And that's when your silence becomes a boundary, a firm, steady line that says, I'm done participating in anything that steals my peace. Walking away also removes you from the emotional noise long enough to think clearly. When you stay in a heated situation, you lose perspective. You say things you didn't mean. You react from the part of your brain that's overwhelmed, not the part that's wise. Silent distance gives you space to breathe, regulate, and return to yourself. And that pause is powerful because it protects not only your peace in that moment, but your integrity long after. Silence is not something people expect when tension rises. They expect defensiveness, explanations, or resistance. So when you choose silence instead, it disrupts the pattern in a way that demands attention. It makes your presence feel intentional and your exit feel meaningful. The lack of response becomes its own message that you value your emotional health more than you value being right. And that shift in priorities changes the entire dynamic. Most importantly, walking away silently makes you powerful because it teaches you self-trust. You learn that you don't need validation to stand firm in what you know. You don't need the other person to agree, approve, or apologize before you choose peace. You stop waiting for someone else's behavior to determine your emotional state. And that is real strength, the kind that grows your confidence from the inside out. Your silence doesn't mean you couldn't speak. It means you chose not to waste your breath. It means you recognized the difference between a conversation and a drain. It means you honored your own emotional limits without shaming anyone else. That kind of boundary isn't loud, but it's unforgettable. People may not remember your words in the heat of the moment, but they will always remember the day you stopped arguing, and walked away with your peace intact. When you remove your reaction from a situation, you remove the emotional currency the other person was relying on. Most conflict continues, not because the issue is big, but because the reaction keeps feeding it. When you go silent and step back, you take away the fuel that was keeping the tension alive. And in that quiet space you create, the other person is left to sit with the weight of their own words, their tone, and their choices. Your silence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. People are often more aware of their behavior when it echoes back to them without interruption. As long as you're responding, defending, or trying to correct them, they can focus on your reaction instead of their own actions. But when you stop engaging, suddenly they don't have you to point to anymore. There's no distraction, no counter-argument, no emotional noise. It's just them, their behavior, and the question they now have to answer. Why did I act that way? That moment of reflection wouldn't have happened if you stayed in the conversation. Silence forces clarity because it removes all external explanations. When you disengage, the other person doesn't get to blame your tone, your words, or your reactions. They have to face the truth of how they handled the situation, and that truth can be uncomfortable. But it's also where growth begins, not because you pushed them, but because you stepped out of the way. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone feel the natural consequences of their behavior without cushioning the impact. When you don't react, people feel the absence of your energy more than they ever felt your presence. It's easy to dismiss your words in an argument. It's much harder to dismiss your silence when the conversation suddenly stops. That shift from noise to quiet makes people notice what they overlooked when they were too busy trying to win. Your silence becomes a wake-up call, not by force, but by contrast. They realize how much of the emotional load you were carrying just by responding. And the truth is, silence brings out honesty in people. Some will reflect, some will regret, some will realize they crossed a line, and some will reveal that your reaction was the only thing they wanted in the first place. But either way, your silence exposes the intention behind their behavior. It lets you see who is genuinely willing to take responsibility and who only wanted control. Reactions can blur that line. Silence makes it clear. Another thing silence does is interrupt the emotional momentum of the moment. Arguments usually escalate because both people keep adding fuel to the fire. But a fire can't grow when one side stops feeding it. Your silence becomes the interruption that gives both sides space to breathe. And in that space, the emotional intensity drops. The other person may start to replay what they said. They may recognize their tone. They may realize they misunderstood you. That internal replay is what creates accountability, and it only happens when you stop talking. Your silence also sends a different message than anger or defensiveness ever could. It tells the other person, I'm not here to fight, but I'm also not here to tolerate disrespect. It's a grounded kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need volume or explanation. It teaches people how to treat you without you having to lecture them. They feel the boundary instead of hearing it, and people respond differently to a boundary they feel emotionally versus one they just hear verbally. When you stay quiet, you also give yourself space to observe. You notice who becomes uncomfortable, who becomes defensive, and who becomes reflective. Their reaction to your silence tells you everything you need to know about the relationship. Some will step back and reassess, some will apologize, some will double down, but their response becomes a clearer indicator of their character than anything they said before the silence. You're not judging, you're simply paying attention. Most importantly, walking away silently takes the pressure off you to fix or manage the situation. You're no longer responsible for smoothing things over, calming the emotional storm, or explaining your perspective for the 10th time. You give yourself permission to stop participating in something that doesn't lead to resolution. And the other person is left with only one choice. Look inward. Whether they do or don't is on them. But either way, you protect your peace, and that's the real power. Protecting your emotional energy starts with understanding that not every situation deserves